Good morning, ESA. My name's Holly Kirk, and I'm going to talk to you today about applying ecological connectivity theory in urban planning. I'm speaking on behalf of the Call Hub connectivity team, and unfortunately, I couldn't actually make it to the conference. So Kirsten is going to hang around at the end of this session and answer any questions you have, but also feel free to reach out to me via Twitter at Holly Kirk. Before I begin, I would like to acknowledge that this work was funded and developed in collaboration with the City of Melbourne Urban Sustainability Branch. I think we can all agree that healthy cities are biodiverse cities, but how do we make our cities hospitable for the wonderful nature that they can contain? How do we make it better for populations of animals to persist and for new populations to arrive? This can be particularly hard because often we're a bit squeezed in terms of resources, both funds and space, but ecological theory can help us answer questions of how, what, and where. Speaking of where, many animals, all animals that live in cities need to move around for the same reasons that people do. They need to move to find food, go to the shops, to find a house to live in, or to meet up with their mates. But cities can be quite difficult places for animals to navigate. Their preferred habitat can often be quite sparsely separated out and distributed, fragmented across the landscape. And the intervening landscape can be really difficult and quite inhospitable to move across. So a big thing that we can do to make our cities better for animals is to think about the wildlife that are commuting around our cities. One of the ways we can do this is by using ecological connectivity theory. Connectivity is essentially a way of measuring how easy it is for an animal to move across the landscape. And as part of our Linking Nature project part 1, we developed a framework that would allow local councils to essentially quantify how connected their landscape was for different target species. I'm going to talk a bit about how that works today and what we've been doing to extend that work. So the method for measuring connectivity that we chose to use in this instance is a geometric method. That is, it takes into account the spatial arrangement of habitat patches, any potential barriers to movement, and the distance between those habitat patches across a landscape. It's measured using the effective mesh size equation, which is essentially a way of quantifying the relationship between the number of connected areas, the total area of a landscape, and the size of each connected area. We did this for 7 different species groups, representing a range of different possible habitat needs, resource requirements, and also movement capabilities. So as you can imagine, a bird might find it much easier to move around the city than, say, a reptile or an amphibian. I'm just going to focus today on one species, or one species group, the insect pollinators, represented here by our dainty swallowtail butterfly. Now, so how does this work? So we start off by essentially mapping all of the available habitat in the landscape. So in this case, we were looking for insect pollinator habitat. So things like mid-story vegetation that flowers, low-story vegetation that flowers, and open green spaces that are easy for a butterfly to fly through. And so we mapped all of those potential patches of habitat across the city. And then we asked, well, which of those habitat patches are connected in terms of the animal's movement capability? So in this case, we asked which of those habitat patches are within 350 meters of each other. And we buffered those patches by that distance threshold. And that's what you can see here. However, roads are potential barriers to movement, and they also fragment our landscape considerably, especially in urban spaces. And so roads fragment those buffered areas and create this fragmentation geometry. Once we've worked out how roads are affecting the connectedness of the landscape, we can then identify the remaining connected areas. And so those are coloured here in different colours. So habitat patches that are the same colour are part of the same connected area. And as you can see here, we can then identify the connected habitat patches. So the blue patches down the bottom are part of one big habitat patch connected via some habitat further off the screen that you can't see. And we're able to then quantify this by calculating the area of those habitat patches and putting that information into the effective mesh size equation. So we actually then implemented this whole process in R into a reproducible workflow. We wanted to have a situation where someone could come along with essentially just two pieces of data, the spatial arrangement of habitat, the spatial arrangement of the barriers in the landscape, and some knowledge of the distance threshold that their animal is capable of moving. We can put those things in and run the workflow, run a simple set of functions and get out their quantification of connectivity at the end as a metric. By implementing this in R, we also were able to, meant that we could reproduce the measure again and again and again, doing it iteratively. Why did we want to do this? Well, to start with, the first thing we wanted to do was actually test the sensitivity of the method to those inputs. So in particular, there's a lot of uncertainty about how capable, different animals are capable of moving through the landscape. We know that some are better than others, but we don't have very good estimates necessarily of their kind of maximum ability, especially in urban places. So having that uncertainty, we were then able to calculate the connectivity, quantify connectivity for a whole range of different distances, and then have a look at how that changed when we were altering the distance. And as you can see, it does jump around a fair bit. Now, the second thing we wanted to do, and this is where it gets really exciting, is that by being able to do this kind of recalculation and comparison of the connectivity of the landscape, we could apply this in a real life application. And so we asked, well, which roads should the City of Melbourne be targeting in terms of trying to improve their landscape connectivity? The City of Melbourne have got some great initiatives to create green corridors along some of their roads, also to slow the traffic down on them, and possibly even to close some off and create parks. So which of the road segments in the City of Melbourne are most would have the biggest effect on connectivity? To do this, we again iteratively essentially modelled what it would be like to remove each road segment from the landscape. And as we did this, as we removed each road segment, we then recalculated the connectivity value for the landscape, and we're able to quantify the difference that between each road segment in terms of its in terms of how much it would affect the landscape level connectivity. And we did this for all 7 species groups for the thousands of road segments across the City of Melbourne, and we were able to achieve a kind of ranking or a hierarchy of roads. And what you can see here are the top targets for biodiversity action, the dark green roads, places where if we can mitigate the barrier effect of that road, it's going to have a really big impact on total landscape connectivity for lots of different species. And the lower impact roads, the lower priority roads, are the ones where even if we did shut the road down and plant heaps of trees, it's not going to make so much of a difference because of the arrangements of habitat and other barriers in the landscape. So summing up, measuring ecological connectivity is tricky. It requires some careful thought. Once you've chosen a target animal, you need to think very carefully about what kind of resources that animal needs, what habitat is important for that animal. You need to think about how easily it moves, and hopefully get some good estimates for its maximum movement capability. and also understand what could be potential barriers to movement. So you can imagine that for some species, a small road isn't going to prove much of a barrier for it to cross over, but for others it could be really important. This geometric measure of connectivity is quite sensitive to the distance threshold that you use. So if you're at all uncertain, you need to use a range to give yourself a range of connectivity metrics to understand that, and then use that to compare. And putting this whole workflow into a kind of reproducible R workflow made it much easier to make comparisons of multiple different planning scenarios. And the exciting thing is this is currently being applied in the City of Melbourne and the City of Sydney in their urban connectivity and urban nature plans. If you'd like to find out more about the workflow itself, have a check out of this GitHub site. It's going to be uploaded there really soon. And that just leaves me to say thank you very much for listening, and hopefully reach out to me if you have any questions via Twitter. Thanks very much. Bye.